tigers, and we knew we wanted to set it in the Sundarbans. But George is always very concerned with character, that there be a person. And in a conservation movie, you need a human face in a way to show the cost of an issue like extinction to human beings, not just the tigers. So we searched long and hard for the right character, and George made we made one scouting trip together, then George made some others, and I received a text in the middle of the night once from when George was on the second scouting trip with the man we thought would be our star and our hero, and it just said X, I won't say the name, our hero X dead drunk on the cabin floor. So we knew we had to keep searching, and heard Alan was speaking in New York, had heard about him, and went to see him, and within sort of 5 minutes of him speaking, George looked at me and said, this is going to be our hero. So we knew he had charisma, we knew he spoke very well, we knew he was very eloquent in his rough style, that he had a wonderful, unconventional eloquence, that he wasn't a pointy-headed academic, with all due respect to pointy-headed academics, but was a sort of really interesting, unusual, robust character. And round about the same time, I got an assignment from National Geographic magazine to do a story about tigers. And lo and behold, the person who had pitched it, the photographer, had worked with Alan, and Alan was going to be part of the story. And so I had the extraordinary position of being able to travel with Alan to Burma, northern Burma, and Thailand, to the reserve he describes so magically in the film. And it only increased. I realized that this was not just somebody who stands up and talks well, performs well. He is so at home in the field, and you could just feel his ease in this kind of environment. And so it all helped, as George was trying to sort of develop the film, to know that this was a character that was really going to stand up, that this wasn't somebody you take out to the Sundarbans and would, fall apart. And also around about that time, his organization, Panthera, decided at last that they were going to wanted data from the tigers on the Sundarbans. They'd never been there because it's such an outlier. It's so disconnected to any of the other tiger wildlife corridors that it had really been disregarded. But as the numbers of tigers dwindled everywhere else, they realized that if there wasn't population there, they needed to go. So this extraordinary timing of these events, meeting Alan, getting to see him in the field, and his organization needing to go to the Sundarbans just fell into place.
Wow, that's a great story. And I guess, talking about the Sundarbans, this is a very remote area that you were filming in. And I wonder if you could tell us, either of you, Caroline or George, about what were some of the practical challenges that you encountered in trying to make this film?
The most important thing that I had to do on these trips to India is to bring my crew back safe and sound. And the thing I'm most proud about is that I got 26 crew members to step out of the Sundarbans and go back to New York. And they were magical because they brought with them so much wonderful footage of the Sundarbans. It is the most dangerous place on earth, according to many people, because it has more tigers than any other place on earth. But it worked this time, and I hope it's going to work next time.
We had an incident where the heat was quite intense too. I mean, there were a lot of, you're confined a lot, as Alan says, to a boat. It's very restrictive, it's very spooky feeling. You're always surrounded by forests, the landscape is always changing as the tide rises and then falls. So every 6 hours you're in a different landscape. Sometimes you're at the bottom of the forest looking up, sometimes the forest is flooded and you're in the middle of it. And it's very disconcerting in that way, and that also But one day when the heat was very hot, George was sitting down and sort of had sat on the ground to take a break and was drinking water. And when he got up, he saw he had been sitting on a cobra skin. So that told us there were other hazards around as well.
Actually, one curious extension of that story is that Deepak Basu was this wonderful Indian man who helped scout the areas which we thought we might shoot the film. And one afternoon, when most of us were asleep, having a siesta, living and shouting, and there on the bank, 10 feet as close as this gentleman right here, was a 12-foot king cobra. And the guy who we found drunk on the floor of the cabin the night before had taken some oars from our boat and was pulling the boat towards the coast so we could get a better picture. And I said, "Get out of here." And we survived that. The man was insane to want to get close to the
Living on the edge. Jeff, I wanted to ask you a question. I meant to mention this about Jeff. So Jeff was a part of the Nature Conservancy's advanced team, assessment team that really spent a lot of time in India thinking about whether our organization could add value and help out there. And I'm curious from your time in India, how your perception of that country might have evolved over the time.
It was my first and only trip. I was there for 2 weeks. I've traveled a bit. I've been to a couple of exotic places, including Haiti during the baby doc era, and also I've been in Zambia on safari, but I've never seen, this is the most fascinating, most diverse country I've ever been to, and I only saw a tiny slice from the Himalayas in Sikkim to another tiger reserve in Madhya Pradesh, probably 3 or 4 hour flight to the west of where this movie was shot. And I've never seen such diversity in people, religion, culture, and economics. I mean, I visited some attorneys' offices in these mega cities, glass, beautiful cities that weren't there 10 years ago. And I saw people living on the street. I saw a leper colony. I just went by a leper colony on the bus. It's just incredible, the diversity of that.
And you mentioned that you visited a tiger reserve. Can you just tell us a little bit about what that was like
Yeah,
and
that
how it
was,
was similar or different than what you saw
Well,
here?
it certainly wasn't as rugged or dangerous as the one we saw in the movie, but I was impressed by the rangers, actually. You could not, the average tourist or the average Indian could not get into this. They would sneak in, of course, but all the major trails were gated off. It was very well patrolled. It was very remote. We saw some fascinating wildlife. We did see a couple tiger tracks, saw leopard, warthogs, most of the animals you saw in the movie. This place was so remote that in the wet, rainy season, monsoon season, the only way the rangers could patrol was on elephant back. You couldn't get a four-wheel drive through this. Even on the roads, you couldn't get a four-wheel drive. There were some villagers living there, and some of them were participating in a program to be relocated away from that particular forest to down by the road, which actually provided them access to food, better food markets, and education. And that was very interesting. We saw some villages that were no longer there, and according to the scientists, the signs of regeneration of the tiger population was very remarkable in a very short time. So it's fascinating.
I've got more questions, but if there are questions from the audience, bring them on. Anand, why don't you go ahead? If you want to just speak up.
Sorry. Should I stand or sit? Whatever. Okay. According to Alan in the film, they get the Sundarbans are like the place where tigers have been managed not only to survive but to thrive. But at the same time, he also mentioned that there are poachers coming to the area and the logic being is that where populations elsewhere dwindle, poachers have to move elsewhere to find stronger, denser, larger populations of the tigers so they can keep their trade going. How then does the outlook appear for the tiger if they're always going to be, if it seems like there are always going to be poachers wherever the tiger population resurfaces?
The situations are, they're two entirely different universes, one in India, one in Bangladesh. The Sundarbans in India has been very well patrolled for a very long time, and there's very, very little poaching in there. It's been patrolled better in the Sundarbans than in many other parts of India, longer. And so that population of what, when we just had finished making the film, came out to be in the Indian side about 110 tigers, has remained pretty steady, it's thought. And when a few are lost or they stray, it seems to be able to keep that regeneration. So that population right now in India seems to be secure, but it's not, and I think first thing is that the environment brought time, precious time for the tiger. It's so difficult, as Alan says. If you can imagine even trying to navigate that or get off out of a boat on foot to go into the forest to hunt for a tiger, it would be very, very difficult, and man is very, very vulnerable there. So I think the environment protected the tigers of the Sundarbans and bought time, whereas in other landscapes like open grasslands, they were being picked off much more readily. In Bangladesh, there are several problems, and the first is that the terrain itself is more forgiving on the margins. It's a vaster land area, and there's, where Alan at the very last scene is setting up the camera trap with Ramon, that's the Sundarbans. It looks like a grassland. You don't get that kind of habitat in India. So once you get that kind of open grassland, people can get into it too. So it's vulnerable because it's bigger, it's got a large tract of land that can be navigated, but the main single reason it's most vulnerable is there is no adequate law enforcement in there. And it's right about now, I think we're on the cusp of the time that the environment brought the tigers is just about running out. People have boats, they can use cell phone communication. It's much more sophisticated, the kind of poaching that you can do. So the race to try and stay ahead of the poachers in the Bangladesh Sundarbans with very rigorous law enforcement is the challenge at the moment. Elsewhere, in pockets, every reserve has a different story. Sometimes you find tremendous success, and sometimes there was a famous case outside of New Delhi, Sariska, a famous tiger reserve, national tiger reserve outside of India's capital city, that woke up one day to the fact that there was not a single tiger left in the reserve. 14 tigers had been poached in the space of 2 weeks, and nobody even knew it. And it was a real wake-up call to the country. So it's very erratic how it's managed. Worldwide, the most exciting landscape in the world for tigers is this place in northern Burma, where I went with Alan. It's the largest, it's about 8,500 square miles of protected land in this huge, immense valley, the Hukong Valley in the northern part of Burma, that is full of prey and full of intact forest, but in all that area may have 9 tigers. And so the trick there is, how do you stay ahead of the here's a place where populations could double, treble, rebound, they have the land, they have everything, but how do you coordinate off from the poachers? And so that's, when you think of all those moving parts and look at a global map and think of all the reserves everywhere, and there are different government policies, different people, that's when it gets, to be Alan, it's overwhelming. We focused on one little story, possibly in a way one of the more manageable parts, but imagine sort of the big global picture.
And this may be a better question for Alan, but Caroline, I'll put it to you. Do you know of captive tigers or tigers bred in captivity have ever been successfully reintroduced into the wild?
I don't, which isn't to say it hasn't happened. Tigers have been captured for a very long time, but they don't seem to have, there's no born free story that I know for tigers, as there are many, seem to be more for lions. There are more tigers in captivity in Texas than there are in the whole rest of the world in the wild. I think there's something like 6,000 tigers in Texas, and there's 3,000 tigers in the wild. And these are bred as exotic animals. Some are captured, some are bred. They very checkered sort of internal governance for ownership of or keeping exotic animals. Some are used, these sort of ghastly shooting farms. Some are bought as exotic pets, and then suddenly they grow up and they're no longer the cuddly cub that you had, with a big tiger, and people have to find them. So the captivity I suppose the only good thing you could say about the captive population is at least you have a gene pool. And possibly if habitat reserves are kept, such a reintroduction program might be possible. There's a plan, I know, to try and bring back the Caspian tiger. And in theory, people think it actually might work. Tigers are relocated often with mixed success, meaning that if there's a crowded reserve, you might move some tigers into another reserve that needs tigers. You have to choose those tigers very carefully. So it's a last resort plan. The tigers are around, in Texas, but it's a last resort plan, and it would be as difficult to do in a way as to just simply save what's already there.
So there's a couple of questions that I want to ask about the making of the film that folks put forward. So here's two that are related. How did you get some of those sweeping aerial shots, and did you use drones?
This movie is the first one to use drones, camera drones, on a large scale. And we had a Swiss team which directed the drone, and then they'd get their shot. And I just read in the newspaper this morning that poachers are already delivering drones to the Sundarbans to try and shoot them from the air.
The Swiss brothers that we had in the movie they've done a lot of commercials, but they had never, George is correct to say that on the big screen, on a movie screen, this is the sort of first major use of aerial photography by drones. And this team were extraordinary. They flew, one put on a hood and directed the camera moves remotely, and the other flew the drone by line of sight. And so they were in perfect sync. They worked, they knew each other so well that they could make it. It's not just that you go high and swoop, you have to turn the camera, you have to know what you're looking at. It's panning, it's just fine camera work. And so one had to do that, the other had to fly it, and they had to do it perfectly. And they were just extraordinary. And one of the most thrilling things was at the end of every day or so, we would see some of the footage that was shot, and the whole crew would sort of just stand there and look at these sweeps, and we just couldn't believe that we had, got this.
How long did it take to make the film?
6 years.
6 years. All right, this is one of our audience members wants to know if they sprayed any perfume on the camera traps to attract tigers? Because apparently the study was done with jaguars and they like obsession for men. I'm getting a no on that one.
No. The tiger, it's like watching a cat. I mean, if any of you have, which I hope I'm speaking to a cat-owning audience here, but I see two cat owners. You know how cats are. I mean, they come and they sniff and they look and they put their whiskers on it and they rub it and they do all of this, and the tigers do the exact same thing. And the place where I have observed tigers openly in a grassland in one of the parks in India, I had this sort of view across a ravine. So it was in a jeep here on the edge of the ravine, a narrow ravine, and then the tiger, safe from all human interference, but visible in all its movements. And it was just fascinating because it was just a big cat. It really was doing everything that my cat would do. And so when they come up and look at the camera, they're just doing what a cat does, which is being curious and sort of sniffing it. We had no scenting or perfume or anything like that.
That's great. Jeff, I've got a couple questions for you. So, what's your take on what some of the greatest challenges and opportunities for conservation are in India?
I think the movie made a very good point of you can't do conservation without considering the people that live in the area. You cannot just fence off whole parts of the country. India is a very poor country. It's a fast developing country. You gave that statistic about you stole it actually from me, the statistic that by 2030 they still have to build 75% of the expected infrastructure. Well, the other statistic is something like 75% of the population is under the age of 18, and it's a very young country. These people are going to need livelihoods, and the key is to balance the needs of this developing country with the needs of the environment. I think that's the number one issue, and then it's up to you to figure out how to do that.
And someone in the audience wants to know, if there's clearly a need to do work in the Sundarbans in Bangladesh, why isn't the Nature Conservancy going to work in Bangladesh? And maybe a little bit of how we decide where we can work.
Well, traditionally, I mean, I've been at the Conservancy for 25 years, and we were very, very deliberate about moving into a new geography. We don't want to expand faster than our abilities. And, people have said, why did you go into India? It was such an obvious choice. Well, it might be an obvious choice because of the need. It's a very difficult place to get established. It's one of the most entrenched bureaucracies in the world. I mean, everything, I don't know what kind of permits you needed, but things are very slow there to get. Bangladesh, there may be some work that would cross the borders. I mean, we certainly, if we see a project that makes sense, it doesn't stop at a geographical border. So it just is not, as far as I know, I'm not one of the planners, but Bangladesh is not in the current queue. The other, Myanmar is the other country that we're starting to develop a program in. So.
And Caroline, Jeff kind of made reference to this. So, the film does an amazing job illustrating the powerful and complicated relationship between people and nature in the Sundarbans. And that scene from the village in Bangladesh where you've got the villagers, they're expressing reverence for tigers and fear. And they're expressing euphoria and sadness about the killing of that tiger. And this is a real issue that our organization, I know, and many others are trying to explore, which is how can we find solutions that benefit people's livelihoods and nature? And I'm just wondering, from your experience making this film, what lessons would you offer to those of us in the conservation community about how to do conservation in a place like this?
The scene in the Bangladesh village was electrifying to us in real time because we knew they killed the tiger. Alan turned up, we turned up with Alan, but there was no setup. I mean, there was no fixer who had, Ramon had told us, located the village, told us, you know, logistics of getting there and everything, but we didn't have any contact within the village or anything. So Alan sat down as you saw him and conducted that interview as you saw it, and we filmed it as it happened, but we really did not know what the villagers would say. And of course our terror was that they were going to say, kill them all. You know, they are a menace. And so to watch this unfolding with the wisdom that it did was, Alan was exhilarated by that afterwards, because in actual fact it was a meeting of the minds. Despite the killing, which to this day I confess I have never looked at, in all the times that scene has played, I've heard it, but I've never opened my eyes to watch it on screen because I know it's horrific. Despite that, he was actually with a bunch of like-minded people who agreed with him. If, you know, they all agreed there should be tigers. They all understood the role of an apex predator within the immediate environment, how it protected the forest, how it protected the things in it. The woman who speaks up and says, no, if there were no tigers, there'd be no forest, was saying what Alan was saying. They had constructed insights based on their hard experience as to what was necessary. They understood that the poachers were the problem, poachers of small prey, not just of the tigers, that they're starving the tigers out, that there needed to be law enforcement, that it needed to be aggressive law enforcement, and there needed to be culpability. And that wasn't, so the directives they were giving Alan, if you will, if he could have come away with a mandate to do what they wanted, it would exactly have fit his own mandate. And what was so moving and encouraging about that was that it showed that far from it being the case that Western conservationists swoop in with unrealistic expectations that go against the grain of what, you know, the local villager wants, actually intelligent conservation goes exactly where local villagers wanted, by and large. A village community as a whole. If he had fallen in amongst bad guys, of course they would have had a different answer, but amongst that intact village of, as you saw, children, men and women, old and young, the consensus spoken boldly before the whole community was a conservation plan that Alan or any of us would have been happy to support.
How do you feel about travel agencies taking tourists to these tiger preserves? And do you have any sense of how villagers who live in these areas feel about that?
The Sundarbans is a bit weird in that regard, in that we were unusual in that George hired and paid took a great deal of trouble in finding a boat big enough for the whole crew to live on. So we were on the water the entire time. And when you talk to borders, by the way, near Bangladesh, our boat was the first non-commercial vessel to pass by river from India to Bangladesh. There had just been a new treaty law made which made it possible, and it meant that when we cross, you know, that boat crosses, it actually is crossing in real time into the other country. But I forgot where I was going.
Tourism.
So the tourists in the Indian Sundarbans, there are 2 camps, I think. There's 7 ranger stations in the Indian Sundarbans where you can get off a boat as a tourist, as a visitor, and set foot on land. In only 2 of those, I believe, can you spend the night. So it's conducive to quick day tourism, and you'll find that it's mostly school children who do that, which is a wonderful sort of idea about people being able to see their own. And Bangladesh is very similar, very sketchy tourism. So when you say, so in the Sundarbans, it's an unfair question. It isn't quite developed enough to be an irritant, or it's a blessing at the moment, it's not yet an irritant. In In some of the other places, the tiger safari park more, there have been a lot of studies done. People are often relocated, as I think you mentioned when you saw, which is to say that you need to square off an area, and the people who are in there are moved out in order that this place can become a dedicated tiger reserve with the idea it would be sustained by tourism. Then you have a different dynamic, because you have people watching from the outsides and saying, well, why can't I live there if these other people are traveling in there? Even though when they're moved out, they're given recompense, and studies have followed up and showed that they often, usually, generally, happily relocate. But that's a tension that's difficult to, I would say that if there's big tourist dollars in those places, you really have to make visible the benefits to the local people. They have to understand that and not resent it. And so that means the guards that are hired must be local, that you try and infiltrate the local community as much as possible with all the outflow from hotels, gifts, whatever it might be. But again, in the Sundarbans, we didn't have that issue.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of the panelists for joining us tonight, and they'll probably stick around for a couple of minutes anyway. Folks have more questions. Those of us who work in the nonprofit sector, we're always coached to, when you have a great group of people in the room, to give you a call to action. So I think I want to just end with my own call to action, because, you know, one of the things that's interesting about this film is it doesn't have a very nice, tidy, neat ending to it. This is a story that's going to continue to unfold. And I was really struck when Alan talks about how he's been studying tigers for more than 25 years, and he's seen fewer than 10. And he didn't have any expectations of seeing a tiger in the Sundarbans. So I know for me, I want to know that tigers are still out there, because of all that that says about wildland still being in existence, and because of what it says about the relationship of people and nature. There are a lot of amazing organizations that are working on tiger conservation. World Wildlife Fund, Panthera, we're going to be working in India. So if you feel that call to action, I just encourage you to follow up and learn more about what's going on out there, and tell your friends about Tiger. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.